It's the bright lights of the disco era in the 1917s, the catchy melodies of ABBA filling stadiums, and all eyes on four Swedish artists as they become pop royalty. Once upon a time, Benny Andersson and Annie Freda Lang were a famous and loved pair in both music and real life. They were at the center of everything, but behind the sequins and harmonies there was a perfectly choreographed dance. Wonderful acts and picture-perfect feels good. Behind the storm, fans thought that ABBA's breakup was just due to changing tastes and personal issues for years. But now Andersson has spoken out, showing a side of Freda that fans never really saw, one that was complicated, turbulent, and sometimes deeply destructive. Their love, their music, their friendship, everything fell apart in ways much darker than anyone knew. But during her career, Freda had many fights, betrayals, and personal problems that were much more dramatic than the well-polished image of ABBA ever gave the impression. At the heart of Freda's most painful feud was her relationship with Benny Andersson. They fell deeply in love and became ABBA's second power couple. Their relationship was similar to that of Born Ulus and Agnetha FSO, but unlike Born and Agnetha's relationship, which was known for emotional ups and downs, Benny and Freda's breakup was full of anger, resentment, and accusations that went back much further to when they first met in the late 1916s. Frankie was a fiery melody, was an independent woman who was determined to make it in the music business. Benny, a musical genius with an ear for melody, saw her talent and charisma as an undeniable force. For years they built something together, a musical empire and a partnership that seemed unbreakable on the surface, but tensions were already rising behind closed doors as ABBA's fame rose. Benny, who worked with music in an orderly way, often ran into trouble with Freda's strong will. She was passionate and expressive, while he liked to be in charge and follow rules. Their creative differences turned into personal irritations, and soon those irritations boiled over. By the early 1918s, Benny's heart had wandered and rumors of his cheating started to spread. When the truth finally came out, Freda was devastated. She was hurt, humiliated, and angry, and not just because she was a wife. She was also an artist who had given ABBA everything. Their relationship fell apart because of broken trust and unresolved problems. By 1981 it was over, but the wounds didn't heal. Even after ABBA broke up, Freda and Benny were still angry at each other. She saw him as cold and distant, like a guy who had given up on her. As soon as he was done with their love, he had to deal with Freda's mood swings and inability to move on with her life. The soft sayings: for years fans and tabloids thought that Freda and Agnetha were in a silent war over who would get the most attention. At first both women denied it, calling each other friends, sisters, and writing partners in songs, but behind closed doors things were more complicated. Freda and her dark, powerful voice being on stage, her low voice. It was often thought that Agnetha's blonde, otherworldly beauty and famously high voice made her less interesting, while Agnetha was seen as ABBA's golden girl. Freda was often seen as the backup act, the second voice, the one who had to fight for attention. Rose in the studio, on tour, and even in interviews. Questions like who will sing lead, whose face will be on the front of the album cover, slowly grew between them and were never fully closed. By the time ABBA ended, Freda and Agnetha had grown apart. They rarely talked to each other, and while most people thought they were getting along, those close to them knew it wasn't. For all her fame and glamour, Freda Lang's life wasn't full of fairy tales and pop songs. Behind the bright stage lights and high-pitched singing was a woman who was haunted by shadows, betrayal, and sadness which the world never really saw. Imagine a newborn child who is innocent and unaware but is already seen as an outcast. Freda Lang was born into a world that didn't want her. Norway was still reeling from the trauma of the Nazi occupation in 1945. Her mother, Signe Lingard, had fallen in love with Alfred Hasse, a German soldier. But when the war ended, women who had relationships with German officers were seen as traitors and were shamed and shunned by their own people. Their children, known as Tiger bears or German children, were treated even worse. They were seen as stains on Norwegian blood and reminders of a time no one wanted to remember. Freda never got to meet her father because she thought he had died. Freda's father had died in battle, and her mother made the heartbreaking decision to flee to Sweden in search of a fresh start and a chance to give her daughter a life free of shame. But the scars of that rejection followed Freda everywhere. Imagine growing up knowing that your very existence was seen as a crime and that the country where you were born had rejected you and seen you as a mistake. Even though Sweden kept her safe, it could never erase the trauma of being a child without a true homeland, a girl without a father, and a woman who was always looking for a place to belong. Years later, Freda found out the truth. Her father had lived through the war and was still alive, but he had built his own life without her. Their long-awaited reunion was awkward, forced, and not happy. There was no happy ending in this story. There were only unanswered questions and a relationship that never really turned into what she had dreamed of. The feeling of abandonment she had as a child never really went away. It showed up in her relationships, her music, and even her sense of who she was. She was always looking for something, anything, love, stability, belonging, but she never found it. For years they never quite found it. After the breakup of her relationship with Benny Andersson, Freda was cast as ABBA's fierce independent warrior. She had fiery red hair and a sultry voice. But behind closed doors, even she was feeling the painful ironies of love. Freda wanted a new life and a new identity, and she found it in royalty. In 1999 she married Prince Heinrich Rauso, who was shown to the world as a German aristocrat. It was like a fairy tale come true. The ABBA queen was now a real person. Princess who lived in a castle in Switzerland, away from the chaos of the music business. But as with most fairy tales, there was a much darker truth behind the wealth and fame. The marriage was anything but perfect. Prince Rauso was strong, well-liked, and had a lot of power, but he was also strict. Freda had spent her whole life working for freedom, independence, and her own voice. All of a sudden she found herself in a world of strict rules, traditions, and silent obedience, the very things she had been trying to avoid her whole life. Silence had come back in a new form. She had been looking for security but had traded one cage for another. While she tried to tell everyone she was happy, there were tense whispers of a woman, torn. In 1998, a mother's worst fear came true when her beloved daughter Anne Lieslott died. She was just starting to get used to living in a new world when tragedy struck. Fame, love, and fortune could not have prepared her for the loss of a child. Died in a terrible car accident. Their death changed everything, and the pain was unbearable. Suffocating, never-ending. Anne Lieslott had been her rock and the reason she kept going after ABBA, Benny, and everything else, but now she was gone. Freda shut the world out, stopped going out in public, and disappeared into the shadows, cutting herself off from the people who cared about her. She had already lost a lot: her home, her husband, her sense of who she was, and now she had lost the only person who really understood her, the once fiery, bold Itzwit. It was like the woman who had been on stage with unwavering confidence had gone away. She no longer wanted to sing, be seen, or live in a world that had taken everything from her for years. She lived in almost complete isolation, grieving not only for her daughter but also for the life she had never been able to hold on to. The world remembers Freda Lindgren as an icon, a legend, and a woman who stood at the top of the pop music world, but her real story was one of struggle, loss, and endless. She was born into rejection and fought her way to fame, but she lost almost everything along the way. She had been abandoned, betrayed, controlled, and broken, but she kept going, even in her pain and in the silence she retreated into. The world may have taken so much from her, but the music she left behind will always be hers. For decades, fans saw Freda as the bold, fierce, and unstoppable performer who stood next to ABBA's biggest hits with undeniable energy. Behind that image was a woman who fought battles no one really understood. Her fights with Benny, her problems with Agneta, and her own tragedies painted a picture of someone whose life was full of both happiness and sadness. Now that Benny Andersson has finally spoken out, the world has to look again at Freda's story. Was she a victim of her circumstances or a woman whose fiery personality brought her down? Was she misunderstood or just as to blame for the problems that surrounded her? One thing is for sure: the story of ABBA will never be the same again.